Chapter 24 of The Silk-Stocking Murders by Anthony Berkeley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The trap is sprung. The party from Scotland Yard was the first to arrive the next morning, for Roger had asked them to come at 11:30, whereas the rest were not expected till 12 o'clock. It was with an air of disapproving amusement that Chief Inspector Moresby, Superintendent Green, and the Assistant Commissioner himself greeted their host and consented to imbibe the glasses of old pale sherry which he had prepared to soothe their feelings. "Now remember," he said, having seen a portion of the sherry safely down on its soothing path, "remember that you're here quite unofficially. It isn't because you're from Scotland Yard that I've asked you to come and watch my little cat and mouse act. Nothing of the kind. It's simply because Sir Paul Graham, Mr. Green, and Mr. Moresby are friends of mine, and I thought I'd like to have them to my party." "Humph," said Superintendent Green, unsmiling. "Ah," said Chief Inspector Moresby, smiling. "Sheringham, you're incorrigible," said the Assistant Commissioner, also smiling. "But I don't approve, you know." "And on the other hand," Roger retorted, "you don't disapprove because you don't know what on earth I'm going to do." "Well, what are you going to do?" asked Sir Paul. "That," said Roger, "is just what you don't know, isn't it? Have some more sherry." He refilled the glasses to a refrain of politely protesting murmurs which he disregarded, as indeed their makers fully intended him to do. "Well, anyhow," persisted the Assistant Commissioner, "what do you want us to do?" "Just sit still and look on at the little drama Miss Manners and I are going to perform, and above everything, not interfere by so much as a grunt till I show I'm ready for you. I warn you, you'll find it a ticklish business to sit still and say nothing, but I want your 3 promises to do so, even though you think I'm killing Miss Manners under your very eyes. Do you agree?" "I don't like this," said the Assistant Commissioner uneasily. Roger became as persuasive as he could. This, he knew, was the moment upon which everything depended. If Scotland Yard refused its presence, the whole plan became useless. He pointed out with all the eloquence at his command that any methods were admissible in such a case, unorthodox as these might seem, and that Scotland Yard was not being invited actively to cooperate, but merely to sit aloof and step in only if they cared to do so, and he pleaded pathetically to be allowed just this one chance of saving Jerry Newsom from arrest and the police from the blunder of arresting him and of proving a fantastic theory of his own which they would simply laugh at if he were to voice it prematurely. In the end, Sir Paul consented. It was the argument concerning Newsom which probably brought him to agree to grace this unconventional scene with his own presence and that of 2 of his chief officers, for Sir Paul was by no means as convinced as were the 2 officers that Newsom was the man they wanted. Like Roger, he simply could not see him in the role, and the circumstantial evidence, after all, though nearly always infallible if strong enough, is not invariably so. Much relieved, Roger emptied the bottle among them and proceeded to give them their instructions. Moresby and Green were not to be in evidence at all. They were to lurk behind a screen which had been drawn across a corner of the room, and only come out when Roger called for them. The Assistant Commissioner was to be introduced, if any introduction was necessary, as Mr. Blake, and his connection with Scotland Yard not revealed. He would sit in a dark corner and make himself as unobtrusive as possible. Would he do that? He would. "Well, Mr. Sheringham," said Chief Inspector Moresby jovially, "we shall expect some startling results from you after all this." "I think you'll be startled, all right, Moresby," said Roger. Superintendent Green continued to say nothing in a very masterly way. Even Roger's excellent sherry had not softened that dour man. Except while actually imbibing it, his face was eloquent of his opinion that of all the time-wasting silly businesses, this was going to be the silliest and waste the most valuable time. Superintendent Green, it was clear, was not going to be an appreciative audience. Having completed his arrangements, Roger called in Anne and introduced her. "Now, Anne," he said in businesslike tones, "I want you to tell these three doubting Thomases that you are doing this of your own free will, that you fully understand the risks you are going to run, even to the extent of losing your life, and that you don't want them to interfere with what I'm doing to you until I myself give the word." "That is so," Anne agreed gravely, "and I should like to add that even though I knew it meant certain death, I think I should still go through with it because I am sure that if necessary one life should be sacrificed to save the others, that this man will certainly take if he's not caught, and also that if Mr. Sheringham had refused to carry out his plan with me after consideration, because he thought it too risky, I should not have rested until I'd found somebody else who would." There was a short silence after Anne had spoken. Even Moresby looked more or less serious. "It is a fact, then, that this scheme involves real danger to Miss Manners' life?" asked Sir Paul uncomfortably. "The gravest," Roger assured him. "Then I suggest," said Sir Paul, "that for your sake she put in writing what she has just told us." "That's a very good idea," said Anne with equanimity. "I'll go and do it at once." The assistant commissioner, who had entertained vague hopes of frightening her out of this harebrained business, looked nonplussed. Anne went out of the room. "You realize, Sheringham," said Sir Paul, "that what she said doesn't make the slightest difference legally. If you do cause the girl's death, you will be responsible in the usual way." Roger nodded. "Oh, yes, I know that, of course, but I thought you'd like to hear her own opinion. By the way, I've been guilty of a gross dereliction of duty. It will interest you gentlemen to hear that although I haven't yet reported it, Miss Manners was attacked yesterday by this brute and very nearly lost her life then." He gave the details briefly and answered such questions as the three asked him. "Newsom," said Chief Inspector Moresby without hesitation. "Newsom, of course," grunted Superintendent Green in disgust. "Really," said Sir Paul, almost convinced in spite of his feelings, "it does look as if Newsom is the man." "So Plato said," agreed Roger equably, "and yet he isn't, you know." "And you really think you know who it is?" "I'm convinced of it, but this business will prove once and for all whether I'm right or not, and it's the only thing that will." He handed to Sir Paul an ordinary envelope, sealed. "By the way, here's the name of the man I suspect. Put it in your pocket and don't open it till the show's over. I should hate you to say afterwards that I'd been afraid to commit myself in advance." Sir Paul took it with a slight smile and stowed it away in his breast pocket. "And now," said Roger, "I think you'd better take up your positions. The others will be arriving at any minute." They had been so far in Roger's study. He now led them across the hall into the sitting room. This was a room of tolerably large dimensions, long and not very narrow. There was a window in one end and two in one of the sides. The door opened in the middle of the end wall opposite the window. Across one corner at the window end the screen had been placed, and in the other corner was Sir Paul's chair. Roger saw them into their places, and then drew the curtains halfway over all the windows, so the two corners were thrown into shadow. He had only just completed these arrangements when the front doorbell rang, and he excused himself. George Dunning was the first arrival, puzzled but good-humored as ever, and Roger took him at once into the study, where Newsom had now materialized from his lurking place in Roger's bedroom. In the spare bedroom Anne was completing her document, a little frightened now, but determined not to show it, and watched over anxiously by a far more frightened Moira, who was under orders to stand by to render such first aid as might prove necessary, but otherwise to put in no public appearance. In the study, Roger, Newsom, and George Dunning were exchanging stilted conversation, the last far too well-mannered to ask what on earth the strangely urgent invitation he had found waiting for him when he got home on the previous evening might portend. The next arrival, however, Sir James Bannister, was less diffident. "Mr. Sheringham?" he asked as Roger opened the door to him. His man had been sent out for the morning. "That's right," Roger agreed cheerfully, allowing him to enter. "I received a message from you asking me to call here this morning on a matter affecting not only my personal honor and reputation, but my actual physical safety, Mr. Sheringham," said Sir James weightily. "These are serious matters, sir. May I ask you to explain yourself?" Certainly, Sir James. Take off your hat and coat and come inside. I shall explain things to you in a few minutes." Sir James raised his heavy black eyebrows, but consented to do as he was requested. Roger took him at once into the sitting-room and sat him down on one of the semicircular row of chairs which had been set out across the end of the room facing the door. Newsom, as had been previously arranged, brought Dunning in at the same time, and the two of them took other chairs. It was now a minute or two past 12 o'clock, and the rest of the audience arrived almost together. The first, a stranger to Roger, in a beautifully cut blue overcoat, the effect of which was marred only by a too bright tie and a pair of patent leather boots with cloth uppers, proving to be the great Billy Burton himself, most popular of whimsical stage humorists, whose yearly earnings amounted to just about 5 times as much as the Prime Minister of his country. Almost on his heels came Arnold Beverley, and with him Plato. The last Roger detained for a moment in the hall. "Haven't got time to go into it with you, Plato, but I want you to back me up. I couldn't get hold of you last night, but I think I'm on the verge of great things. All I want you to do is to sit tight. You'll see my idea in a minute, and remember that all the responsibility is mine. Come along, and I'll show you where to sit." Plato looked surprised, but there was no time to explain anything further, and Roger hurried him into the only vacant chair at the end of the ark, just in front of the corner where Sir Paul was sitting. "Be ready to back me up if I want you," he whispered, a little anxiously. Stepping past him, he dropped a note unostentatiously in Sir Paul's lap before making his way to the middle of the room. Roger drew a quick little breath as he glanced at his audience. Among those 7 men facing him was, he felt utterly convinced, the callous but unbalanced brain that was responsible for the deaths of at least 4 girls, and was probably planning already the murder of others. And now the crucial moment had arrived, by which he was to stand or fall. Roger was not often nervous, but his heart beat a little irregularly as he thought of the tremendous responsibility which the next few minutes must bear. "Gentlemen," he said in an ordinary conversational voice, "most of you know why I've called you together this morning so urgently. Let me explain. You may have seen in the newspapers recently the reports, from time to time, of a novel form of suicide in which the victim, always a girl, hangs herself with one of her own stockings. Quite unofficially, I've been looking into these cases in an amateurish way, and the conviction has been forced upon me that they are not cases of suicide at all, but of murder. If this is the case, gentlemen, a very serious state of affairs has arisen. In the middle of our community there is a man at liberty with a brain so unbalanced that his supreme joy in life is the killing of defenseless girls. He is worse than a homicidal maniac, for in all other respects he may be quite sane. I will not trouble you now with the way in which this conclusion has forced itself upon me, though I shall be ready to give anybody any information on this point later. But the important thing is that there is not a jot of evidence in the legal sense to support it. Not one jot. I am, therefore, as you will see, in a very difficult position. I know that these deaths are not suicides, but murders. But if I went to Scotland Yard and told them so, they would, on the only kind of evidence I could produce, simply laugh at me. It has therefore occurred to me to form a committee of respectable citizens drawn from representative lines of our national life to relieve me of the responsibility of my knowledge and consult as to what should be done. You, gentlemen, are the committee I have, quite gratuitously, selected. It is up to anyone to refuse to have anything to do with it, as I need not say. But first, I ask you to hear me a little further." Roger paused and moistened his lips. The audience were quite still, and their intense interest was evident. "To discover the means by which these unfortunate girls met their deaths has necessitated a long and arduous inquiry," he resumed, encouraged. "The many details had to be worked out or deduced each by itself. Much had to be imagined. Much was only brought to light after weeks of work. To explain all these steps and enumerate the various points in detail would take far too long. I therefore propose to give you here and now a representation of how this man goes about his work. I warn you, the thing will not be easy to watch. It is my intention to bring home to you the gravity of the state of affairs by showing you exactly how these girls have died. There will be no faking or rigging. A lady has kindly placed herself at my disposal, and I am going to bring her within an inch of death before your very eyes. And I should tell you that, so strongly does she feel on the subject, that she has told me that if the experiment results in her actual death, as I am bound to confess that it may, she will consider the sacrifice worth while if only public opinion can be stirred up to hunt this brute down. That is all I have to say, except to ask you to sit absolutely still and silent while the representation is being performed, and to remember that any well-meant attempt at interference when matters have reached a critical stage will almost certainly have the opposite effect and result in causing the lady's death. Please use every ounce of self-restraint you possess." As Roger had anticipated, murmurs of protest rose the moment he had finished speaking, but disregarding them, he went to the door and threw it open. At once, Anne walked in, pale but perfectly collected. Roger had coached her well in the time at his disposal, and she began to speak at once. "I want to add to what Mr. Sheringham has said," she said, in her rather precise tones, "that the responsibility for what is going to happen is entirely mine. I want nobody to interfere or do anything at all except sit quite still, even if I scream for help or seem to be quite at my last gasp. If you do, you will spoil everything. Thank you. I'm quite ready, Mr. Sheringham." Roger turned to the audience. "What you are now going to see," he said, "is an exact replica of what must have happened each time one of those girls died. You must imagine that you are in the room of a flat belonging to one of the girls." He hurried out of the room. Anne picked up a book and, seating herself in a chair, began to turn the pages. In a moment Roger entered the room again, and she jumped up. "Why, hello, Mr. Sheringham," she said in a pleased voice. "You're quite a stranger." They shook hands. "I was passing," said Roger, "and thought I'd like to look in and see you." "Where's Phyllis?" "She's gone out to do some shopping, and then she's going on to lunch with a friend." "I see. You're all alone then?" "Yes, quite." "Good. I was wondering if you'd come out and have some lunch with me, perhaps. You haven't any engagements or anyone coming round to see you?" "No, nobody. I'm quite free till the theater this evening." "Excellent. Well, what about getting your hat on and coming out?" "Yes, I'd love to. Will you wait here?" She turned towards the door, and Roger drew a black object from his pocket, shaped not unlike a small pestle, and concealed it behind his back. "I'll open the door for you," he said, following Anne. "Thank you." She stood aside while he opened the door. "I won't be a minute," she said, and began to walk out. Immediately her back was turned, Roger made believe to strike her on the back of the head. Without a sound she sank back, and he caught her in his arms, lifted her off her feet, and laying her on a settee nearby, tiptoed to the door. A little gasp had sounded from the audience as Anne collapsed, but a tense silence now prevailed. With infinite caution, Roger stole just outside the room and stood for a moment listening. Then, drawing a small hook from his pocket, he screwed it quickly into the top of the further side of the door, opening the latter wide so that the audience could see exactly what he was doing. Closing it again, he walked over to the settee and, slipping off her shoes, began to unfasten one of her stockings, which were of pale-colored silk. Stripping it from her leg, he proceeded to tie the two extreme ends tightly together, testing the strength of the knot with his knee. He placed the loop over her head so that it was lying loosely round her neck, and put the shoe back on her foot. Somebody in the audience pushed a chair back sharply, but otherwise there was no sound. Taking no notice of them without even a glance in their direction, Roger picked up a chair and placed it squarely in front of the half-open door, its back towards the door, shifting its position as if at some pains to get it exactly right. Satisfied at last, he strolled back to the settee, his hands in his pockets, and again stood looking down at its occupant. Anne began to show signs of returning consciousness. She moved her head more freely and made little fluttering motions with her hands. Immediately, Roger picked her up and carried her over to the door. There, amid a tense silence, he propped her in such a position that she was half sitting on the chair back, her feet on its seat, and holding her there, he gave the loop round her neck 3 or 4 twists, passed it over the top of the door, and slipped the other loop so formed over the hook. Then he lifted her up in both arms, pushed the door shut, and dragging the chair up to it with his feet, replaced her in the same position as before. But now that the door behind her was firm, she could be so balanced as to remain there without being held. He stepped away from her. Slowly, Anne's eyes opened, and she gazed round the room as if dazed. Her hands gripped the chair back under her. Her lips fluttered. She seemed to be trying to speak. Roger waited till it was clear that she had practically recovered all her faculties, then darted forward and, lifting her up, kicked away the chair. "Darling Anne," he whispered, his face as white as hers, "be brave, my dear." And lowering her with slow deliberation, he stood back, her head well above the top of the door, her feet at least 18 inches above the floor. Anne hung by her neck. A little choking cry had broken from her as Roger lowered her, but now she was plainly incapable of uttering a sound. There were stifled noises from the audience. Some were leaning forward in horror. Others had half risen. A voice, low but authoritative, said, "Keep still, everyone, please." It was Newsom, who had risen from his chair at the other end of the arc from Plato, and was standing with his back to the screen, his face deadly pale, but gallantly doing what he had been told. All eyes were fixed upon Anne in horrified fascination. She had been hanging there only a few seconds, but already her face was crimson and contorted. The veins were swelling rapidly as if they were going to burst through the skin. Her lips were drawn back in a hideous grin. Her feet scrabbled on the door as if trying desperately to find some lodging place. One hand was tearing at the stocking round her neck, the other clutching at the air in front of her. It was a horrible spectacle, and normal flesh and blood could hardly bear it. Everywhere there was the sound of chairs falling as their occupiers pushed them back in rising. Cries of protest began to fill the room. Though he was trembling himself in every limb, Newsom had to restrain Sir James Bannister by sheer force from rushing forward. Disregarding entirely the din, Roger strolled forward nonchalantly, his hands in his pockets, towards the corner occupied by Sir Paul. In front of the latter still sat Plato, the only one still remaining in his chair. "That's how you do it, Plato, isn't it?" Roger asked easily. Plato looked up at him with bright, mad eyes. "No," he said in a thick voice, "I hold them up every now and then, to stop them." He broke off abruptly. "Hold him, Graham!" shouted Roger, and hurled himself towards Anne. Just as he reached her, the convulsively struggling body went suddenly limp. End of chapter 24.